Hey guys, and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Vessel of Hatred discussion. With the DLC right around the corner, I'm talking today about that big topic, the initial class rankings. First though, I want to specify what makes a class good in this DLC. In short, each class should have at least one build that's fun and functional in Torment 4, that's the new highest difficulty. But let's say a class has that, just one build and it's clearing around pit level 80 in the endgame, but maybe struggling beyond that. While another class has multiple builds that can clear tier 80s and then beyond, clear tier 100s with significant speed. Then of course that class is going to be higher on the ranking. With that we have a good gauge on how things stand thanks to the review build. A pile of people were able to test the DLC a bit before the launch, we were actually in that, so having seen the discussions, the showcases, now the embargo is lifted, and our own experience, we do have these initial rankings. Keep in mind, it's based on our experience with a limited 1 week of play though, compared to how things might stack up a month from now in the DLC, or even early on with more changes that are expected. For the list though, we're actually going to have 5 ranks for this listing, even though there's 6 classes now, because I'm going to put 2 into the same rough level as I'll explain. That allows me to start at the bottom at 5 with the seemingly very clear Barbarian at the bottom of the pile. Here's the context as to why I say that. Looking back at Season 5, Barbarian did not have a good time. They were the last class in terms of output by a large amount. They changed the core stat scaling stuff to counteract the fact that Barbarian has 4 weapon slots for aspects. That and various reasons led to Barbarian being kind of the king of Diablo 4 for the first year of its life. They finally decided to address this kind of imbalance in the way they get more aspects by messing with their main stat scaling. Seemingly, they went a bit too hard, and ultimately, they were noticeably behind the other classes in Season 5 for their overall clears in, say, the high-level pits. What you're seeing now, though, is what was happening in the PTR. This unbelievable Thorn Reflect damage due to what was a bug. They were able to double dip, getting significantly more thorns stacked up than maybe was intended. Obviously, it was ridiculously strong and arguably the strongest thing in the whole PTR, but they have indeed fixed that for the DLC launch. This left Barbarian in kind of a familiar state. Looking back at Season 5 where, you know, it's Whirlwind build, which has bad single target, or it's the Bash build, which has great single target, but terrible AoE. With all the rebalancing, those aren't necessarily options now anyway. So Barbarian is now finding itself without a certain top build that's going to do well in the endgame. This is even more so the case because there was kind of extreme neglect for this class in the review build from what I've seen. Many of the creators I expected to be talking about Barbarian didn't say a single thing. And well, they've been releasing videos on the Spiritborn, the new class. The only hope I think the class has is with the new skill Mighty Throw working its way into different builds. We're seeing some showings of the Hammer of Ancients build, having that worked into it, working well for leveling, but yeah, it needs testing in the true endgame. So it's very hard to say how it's going to perform at this time, right off the back of what was a really dire state for the class, the worst it's ever been in. So that's why I've got it at 5, but that could change. Above that then, we have Druid at 4, which is also in a weird as hell state. Druid basically became this lightning shaman in Season 5. The Storm Slide build was awesome, allowing you to spread out these landslides and earthquakes, and by doing so, you'd then potentially trigger your lightning storm and lightning strikes, which when they landed would potentially trigger your landslides and earthquakes. 2 sides of a coin bouncing around them in a very hybrid synergistic style. Working a bit of poison around that and you've got kind of sustained damage too. There are a lot of versions of that build, but let's say you go bear, you can also be quite tanky on top. So when we found out that they've decided to basically delete the function of that build by preventing it from being so synergistic anymore, yeah, it left people confused. This was highlighted again after the PTR and the ridiculous shout spam build, where druids were just standing still and basically being barbarians and standing and shouting over and over, and was very, very unique for the whole game, let alone the class. So, yep, that's been hard limited. They've made it so you simply cannot spam the shouts anymore, not nearly as effectively or as fast. Might still be reasonable, but is it going to be their best option? Hard to say. So what do they actually want? It would appear that pure landslide is going to be a good, at least reasonable entry option, since, you know, it wasn't relying on any bugs and hasn't really been addressed in the patch in any relevant way. Previously, it was performing fine, just not as good as, say, Storm Slide with the awesome synergy that had. Druid was also one of the lesser tested and discussed classes in the review build in my experience and from what I saw, potentially because Spiritborn is kind of the new shaman, while Druid is kind of losing that identity, I guess. We'll see how Druid turns out. Just like Barbarian, I think it deserves more attention and testing, and there could be that kind of golden bullet that hasn't been realized yet en masse. On the bright side though, we move to 3rd place where I have Necromancer, which is an interesting one because I don't think I've ever seen Necromancer with this many builds that have this much potential. From the Blood Wave Bone Spirit combo, as they're calling it, Blood Spirit, or just raw Bone Spirit being really good for the last little while, in the PTRs, the last season, and so on. Ultimately, once you get really geared, Bone Spirit becomes an incredible scaling build, as always. But there is other contention. There's also hope for an overpower focused Soul Rift build. There is that new ultimate skill Soul Rift, basically applies this AoE around you, soaking up souls from nearby enemies, providing with a shield, setting yourself up for a lot of overpower potential. It's also the case that minions have seen some attention, but I have read some interesting reviews of it. It would appear that minions are going to be much better early and should perform pretty damn well in the endgame, but not once you reach tier 4, the highest level, where, they start to struggle. I foresee issues again with being unable to directly control all of your minions to hit that specific enemy or have them avoid certain mechanics. It's still ultimately very clunky. Out of all of them though, the thing that people are most excited for is the Blood Wave build, because yeah, Blood Wave is going to be relevant in the new season. Finally, maybe for the first time in its life, they made some serious changes to it. It's now going to be generating way more blood orbs, and that's how you're generating the bone spirits off the unique chest. You walk through the blood orbs, you trigger regular bone spirits. They reduce the amount you actually need if you get a top roll, and then with more blood orbs actually spawning, you're able to get them. The cool tech that I'm seeing with this then is using bloodlance of all things combined with the gore quills aspect, where you throw a bloodlance and consume all of the blood orbs on screen. This then will spread out massive amounts of the bone spirits from your location, which should be pretty damn effective. Then with the fact that it's an overpower kind of blood related build, you're going to have high health, you're going to have fortification and barriers. So yes, it should be survivable and pretty good range to it as well. Compared to say Bone Spirit that's just got that really limited awkward range, this should feel way better in content like Infernal Hordes. So very exciting, and hopefully it turns out to be the best. How will that work overall though? I have seen reports of pit clears around 80 to 90. I think tier 100 is definitely going to be possible with some time to gear and a bigger pool of players playing the game. But above that, at second place, this is the double. This is where I've got both Rogue and Sorcerer. It's weird. There's been new limits added to both of these. The key builds for Rogue are 100% tied to Victimize, their key passive, which essentially is a lucky hit chance proc doing this explosion of damage. They mechanically changed this to have a kind of internal delay, forcing you, no matter how high your lucky hit chance is, to not get a Victimize off, even if it should have procced 100 times in that 1 second. What is interesting though, is that it's kind of stacking up that damage for the next one, which yes, sounds just like the Barbarian from season 1, where you would stack up damage on a target and then it would explode based on how much you stacked up prior. So you're playing Victimize much the same, it's just kind of coming out in these bursts with a delay between them, but they're generally hitting harder. It feels clunky, it looks weird, and you have less control over it. So what we're expecting to do in this endgame is to manage the explosions of Victimize by pulling enemies together, allowing you to set up the Victimize explosions kind of consistently. So I'm looking forward to testing that in the true endgame. Rogues have been doing great though in the review build with builds tied around this. It's not just the new Dance of Knives that can be a great proc for this. It's basically anything that's going to be attacking a lot and proccing a lot of lucky hit to maximize Victimize. So Rapid Fire, Barrage, Flurry, even Twisting Blades has potential here with some buffs that we see in the patch. There could be a lot of ways that you could run Victimize instead of just the new skill that I think everyone will start with because new and fun. So Rogue has serious potential. It's just with these new limits added and the buggy nature of it, will they mess with it? Will they balance it, hotfix it? We're going to have to see. On the other hand, with Sorcerer, their infinite potential is kind of gone with the whole Lightning Spear concept because they have hard capped the amount of Lightning Spears that you can spawn. No matter what you do, what gear you're running, how far in you are, you can only have 12 out at one time, which is obviously a major concern for the class power level overall. And yet, I think what it's done is just kind of pull back what was kind of ridiculous long term in terms of crazy high level gear. And with this cap on the Lightning Spears, it's allowing you to kind of work that 12 Lightning Spear concept in to other builds. So you have the splintering energy aspect in, but maybe the core of the build is actually Chain Lightning and Unstable Currents, or Frozen Orb with Shattered Winterglass. It allows you to create what Josh calls a quote-unquote normal build that's still actually using Lightning Spears. With Splintering Energy, how will you maximize those into a build effectively at the same time? That's the question. Obviously, it's got a lot less long-term potential in having 40 plus spears out with pure Lightning Spear. So just like what I've said with Rogue, they've changed the mechanics, they've capped stuff. It's a bit weird, but it might result in quite a variety of options for the class. And if the power level is good, which it appears to be, it should be fine. However, we are seeing a lot of discussion around the elemental constellation aspect change, where the insane change was shown. The buff to weapon damage going up to 1050%, confirmed not to be a typo or an issue, an accident by the devs, but actually real. So there is some ludicrous potential with that if it turns out to be overtuned and really strong and just the best thing, obviously. But that could also be hotfixed if it's absolutely ridiculous. We'll see. So yeah, that's why I have Sorcerer and Rogue kind of at rank 2 together. They both have really high potential, but it sounds a bit wonky and weird with these changes they've made, to the point where we are thinking there's a chance they might hotfix stuff if it turns out too crazy. We'll have to see. Above them all, though, at first place, seemingly, is our new class, Spiritborn. Go figure, they want the new class to be as strong as possible, arguably the strongest thing in the season, so that more people play the game, try the class. It makes complete sense. This was fully expected on my part, and to see that it was so strong in the review build, and we expect at launch again, yeah, it's really high potential. There are many ways Spiritborn looks to have a lot of potential just because of some core aspects, but you know, other playstyles look really incredible too, like Thorns, for example. To cut to the point though, there's a lot of discussion around the Quill Volley Eagle builds, or leaning more into poison and touch of death specifically. Both builds are going to feel similar in the fact that they're both going to use the ridiculous unyielding hits aspect, which allows you to get percent of your armor added straight to weapon damage, and so you can armor stack beyond the actual cap and be increasing your damage, maximizing your physical negation to also maximize your damage. Pretty convenient. Their new uniques though, things that are going to turn your core skills into basics and then make them only cost resource if you got max at the time, making your damage essentially guaranteed crits with bonus crit damage per point of resource you spend in that moment. A really high multiplier concept, and that's why both versions of these top builds, whether it's Quill Volley or Touch of Death, they're both going to use that concept. Maximizing your resource is going to be a thing that's going to be really important then, so that the new Ring of Midnight Sun, that means you spend half of the resource in the last 2 seconds when you crit. And if you're always critting, always half. Now between the two builds, we are wondering what's going to scale better long term. There's kind of expectations that they're going to be very competitive, with Quill Volley maybe coming online sooner and being easier to get to, but with Touch of Death and poison as a concept being tied into it, there's a lot of scaling potential there. So that might actually be the better build long term. What you choose to start with then based on that is up to you and the testing that we see. Throughout the review build though, it definitely was the Spiritborn who seemed to have the easiest time getting to the end game and doing the stuff in the end game, with these obvious, really effective synergies that seemed easy to get online. So I expect them to have a great showing in the initial days of the season. How will it all turn out though? Long term, we'll see. But to begin with, I hope this gives you some context based on what we've seen and learned about. For now then, I've been Hollow, you've been you. We'll see you in the DLC. Expect lots of guides and coverage in the coming days. Until then, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.